In this video, we're going to take a look at a red ink by Pilot in their Iroshizuku line, Momiji, or Autumn Leaves. Now, as always, there's timestamps down below so you can skip around, but if you've got the time, I'd appreciate you checking out the entire video. Also, down in the description is a link to a playlist covering all of the red inks here on the channel. As always, I'm an ink guy. I still am. Let's get into the first writing sample done on 90 GSM Clairfontaine. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade. The extra fine is about the same tone as the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 8 seconds to dry. Medium is the same tone as the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, and 11 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us no color variation because there is none, and the smear test you could not recover if you smeared while you were writing. To have a range of experience with this ink, all of the writing samples are done with a Jinhao 159 with a 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a medium, and a Jinhao X750 with an extra fine. Then a Kaweco Sport with a broad nib was inked up, used for a day, and used to take the notes for this video. The next writing sample is done on 52 GSM Tomoe River. This is not a bleed spot that you're seeing here. This is a transfer from another page. Other than that, we have no bleeding and no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. The extra fine is quite a bit lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, and 16 seconds to dry. The medium is darker than the extra fine, just a little bit lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 31 seconds to dry. It's interesting how these are very pink leaning and this is much more magenta leaning a red. It's interesting that very different tones here. The scrubby for both show no color variation. We didn't expect it and we didn't get it. And the smear test, you could not recover if you smeared while you were writing. I agree with Vita. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. A line of ink is put down, and then it's put into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And you see this very pinkish tone working its way up, and a very interesting thing occurs between the pink and the darker magenta at the top. And it's this thin line of a kind of orange that's right there, just below the top of this. It's incredibly interesting that it's there, because I would have never guessed it. Now the one on the right is allowed to dry for 10 minutes before it's dunked into water. And it looks very much the same. It's a bit darker line at the bottom. It's more solid moving up, but very much the same. And you do see the hinting of that orange-ish line across the top. It does suggest that it might be a little resistant. The next writing sample is done on 80 GSM Rhodia dot pad. Once again, this is transfer, not bleeding, because we have no bleeding and no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade. That's not spread, that's me being ridiculously sloppy. The extra fine is quite a bit lighter than the stub. It's also very pink leaning. It has no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 7 seconds to dry. The medium is darker than the extra fine, not nearly as dark as the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 15 seconds to dry. Scrubby for both are showing no color variation, but man, look at the difference in pens. We're not getting shading in the writing, and the smear test you probably could not recover if you smeared while you were writing. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. Smear's allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it looks perfectly safe to use in a note-taking situation. There's no loss of information there. Now, water is lifting all those dark tones, really leaving that pink on the paper. I was surprised by that, but the second chromatography showed that that would happen. Pen flush, that purpley tone, that's me being sloppy, and that's a transfer from a paper towel. Other than that, it's doing nothing more than what water did. It's not needed to clean it out of your pen, as it only took water for me. The 1/3 bleach solution is completely removing it from the paper, but it is also discoloring the paper just a little bit. The next writing sample is done on Moji paper. no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade. The extra fine is lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, and 9 seconds to dry. The medium is the same tone as the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, and 14 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show no color variation and we're really not getting it. In the smear test, you could not recover if you smeared while you were writing. For the inks tested, the average viscosity was 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Iroshizuku's Momiji, or Autumn Leaves, has a viscosity of 1.46, making this a wet ink. If you're interested in how the viscosity tests are done and all of that stuff, there's a link to that video down in the description. The next writing sample is done on Leuchtturm 1917 paper. Now, again, if you're seeing sort of a trend here, sometimes they just go to the next page too fast. That's not a bleeding, that's a transfer spot. We do see a little bit of ghosting at the stub. Other than that, we have no bleeding and no ghosting. Only ghosting at the stub. The stub has no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade. The extra fine is quite a bit lighter than the stub and quite a bit more pink, with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, and 5 seconds to dry. The medium is darker than the extra fine, kind of magenta-y toned here. Interesting 3 tones. Nowhere near as dark as the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, and 6 seconds to dry. Scrubby for both show us no color variation because there is none, and the smear test you could not recover if you smeared while you were writing. For the inks tested, the average dry time was 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Iroshizuku's Momiji, or Autumn Leaves, has an average dry time of 15 seconds, making it normal. The last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper. So obviously there's a lot of bleeding very heavy into the paper. The good news is none of this is through the paper, it's not touching the page underneath, but it does make the back of the page completely unusable. If you use both sides, you lose both sides of information. The medium has feathering all over it, tiny feathering, not so distracting to really be a problem. You have to really be looking at it. You see it much more in the Momiji, but I don't see it as too bad. It does spread to about a broad. No halo sheen, no shade. The extra fine is a little bit lighter than the stub. It does have tiny feathering. Again, not distracting, not really a problem with it, just that it is there. And if you pay attention to these things, you're really going to see it in the word the. You're really going to see it in the word the, in the word jumps, in the word dog, in the word lazy. But not so bad. It just sounds like it's being bad. 1 second to dry. The scrubby shows no color variation, and we're not getting any. In the smear test, you could recover if you smeared while you were writing. Instead of finding inks that look like Iroshizuku's Momiji, I'd prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. Now, because I'm dealing with magenta and pink and red with this ink, I really needed something that could work with all 3 of them, so I chose a nice turquoise from Monteverde, their California Teal. Now, if you'd prefer a different complement color, then down in the description are links to those playlists. So what do I think of Iroshizuku's Momiji, or Autumn Leaves? A kind of pink or magenta to this red, depending on the pen. I usually like Iroshizuku inks, but this one just read very plain on the page. For me, it's just missing something that would make it interesting. Unfortunately, it's not to me. So what nib and pen will give the best writing experience with this ink? Obviously, it's much more about what tone or particular shade of this kind of color and how much it changes is really what's going to decide it. Now, for me, I really want that darker and more red from this, even though red's not normally my color. I'd prefer it from a very wet, fine or extra fine pen with no shading, but a nice solid red. I hope you got something out of this video, and in the next video, we're going to take a look at Ackerman's number 3, Ackerman Blue.